And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your hopefully happy hump day here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, today is Bill Pullman's 72nd birthday. You know, the President of the United States in Independence Day and the unfortunate sequel, many decades later, Independence Day Resurgence. I guess it was 20 years later, give or take. But I didn't want to do a conventional retrospective episode. I wanted to talk about a Bill Pullman film that I haven't mentioned because I, of course, have discussed Spaceballs. I have discussed Independence Day. And there are other movies which he was in that have been mentioned, such as While You Were Sleeping. And I wanted to focus on a different film of his, where he's nominally the lead. And this is an unusual thing in that his character is the lead, but most of the marketing materials for this film have his two co-stars front and center on the poster and not him. I'm trying to rack my brain and figure out, are there any other movies where they do that? I think they just did it because the other people in question were bigger stars than him at the time, and I guess they figured that would help the box office. And irony alert, usually I say spoiler alert, the irony alert is it actually worked, because this film was a box office hit. It grossed more than 3 times its production and marketing cost. And I feel like Bill's performance is a little bit underrated and undersold because of the two big hitters joining him in this film. The movie is Harold Becker's 1993, seems to be one kind of a thriller and then becomes another kind of a thriller, Malice. And Malice is a film that if you go on, you sort of check out all of the specs. It was released in October of 1993. I've talked about the fact that, in my opinion, 1993 is the single best year for movies in the history of Hollywood. I will stack it up against any other year, whether 1999 or 94 with Shawshank and Gump and Pulp Fiction and Hoop Dreams and a lot of other great films. But Malice is a movie that I saw with my father on its opening weekend. The reviews were very mixed. And I don't just mean because the Rotten Tomatoes score is between 50 and 60%, which means it's not certified fresh, even though more than half of the critical, scores were favorable. But mixed in the sense that there was a lot of polarization, and there is a lot of polarization. If you were to check out what I'm saying, go to Rotten Tomatoes and then you can click on the individual reviews. But this is not a film that people had a sort of flat response to. In general, people either loved it or just didn't get it. In a weird way, a little bit like 6 years later with the Blair Witch Project, where you have people like me saying this might be the scariest movie in the history of cinema, and a certain percentage of people who wanted to like the movie said, "You're an idiot, this isn't scary, nothing happens. I think this is a psyop to see if anybody's stupid enough to think that this is really scary, or they're just pretending, because, you got to be a follower. If 10 people say it's scary, you can't say that it isn't." There were many who felt that Blair Witch Project was just not scary, and there had to be something weird going on, that it was all a big trick. These people don't really think this movie's scary. Well, I actually did. There was no psyop. Anyway, so Malice stars Bill Pullman, and the co-stars are Alec Baldwin, who was still just about on the A-list. In fact, he was on the A-list at the time, and Nicole Kidman, who was very much still on the rise, even though she had been a star for a couple of years already. Days of Thunder with her future husband, Tom Cruise, had been 1990. She has a big role in Billy Bathgate, a kind of underrated gangster film with Bruce Willis, and who was in it? Lauren Dean, and Dustin Hoffman, who was fantastic as, who did he play? I think he played Dutch Schultz in that film, a much more kind of upscale Dutch Schultz than Tim Roth played in the movie Hoodlum with Andy Garcia and Lawrence Fishburne, among others. So Malice finds Bill Pullman somewhat unlikely married to Nicole Kidman. And it's not that they aren't both attractive people, they are, but the pairing is weird. It's just an odd pairing, even though they're both attractive people, obviously. You know, Bill Pullman, in a similar vein to an actor I'm very fond of, Dennis Quaid, where they always said about Dennis Quaid was he was supposed to be a character actor, like he had the tools and the skill set to be a great Hollywood character actor for decades. But the problem with Dennis Quaid is that he just looked too much like a leading man, hence why Dennis Quaid had a fantastic leading man era. You know, you don't throw something like that back. He got to have a leading man era, and he made a lot of great movies in the 80s. Well, in the case of Bill Pullman, I feel the same, which is that he was supposed to be a guy who was going to play a lot of sort of quirky supporting parts, but he ended up being a really strong leading man in a lot of different movies. So Malice, I think it's set in Pittsburgh, and Bill's character of Andy he's a teacher. I think that is he a college professor? I think he teaches at a junior college, something like that. Like he's not teaching at Harvard. This isn't that sort of movie. But he's presented as very intelligent, and Nicole Kidman, his wife, very lovey-dovey. Nicole was very young at the time. Again, she's clearly playing a little bit older. She was only 25 when this movie was shot. She plays an ocular specialist in Days of Thunder. She's like 21 going on 22 there, but she pulls it off. She just had a very mature look. So they're married. And the thing with Nicole, where I mentioned how this pairing it doesn't look right, Nicole had another movie released right around the same time called My Life with Michael Keaton. I almost said Michael Douglas, but with Michael Keaton. And that film was written and directed by Bruce Joel Rubin, who also did Ghost earlier in the decade, and Jacob's Ladder also earlier in the decade, both from 1990. And it also deals with death and dying and notions of afterlife and all of these different kinds of things. But I would say that the pairing of Nicole Kidman and Michael Keaton is weirder, just more off than her and Bill Pullman. Maybe we're supposed to believe they didn't have chemistry. Like that could have been part of it. But the film seems to be settling into, it looks like there's a serial killer situation, and this is going to be a serial killer thriller. And some of the early advertisements for the film, like I said, the advertisements are positing that the film stars Nicole Kidman and the other aforementioned big hitter, Alec Baldwin. But we're set up with this serial killer story. There's somebody's bumping people off where Bill Pullman is a teacher. And what's going on here? And then the film swerves and goes in an entirely different direction. And when I saw the film that opening night, I immediately thought of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Now, this is not Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It's not as good. How could it be? But the way the movie sets up, this is going to be a serial killer story. And how are Nicole Kidman and Bill Pullman going to be involved? Is she at risk? Is she going to get bumped off? And then is that what's going on? But then we meet a character, a brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon, played by Alec Baldwin, whose character is a genius, but has a very hard edge to him. And this is not the kind of guy that you would really want to meet in real life, because he appears to have a serious ego problem, and possibly even what is referred to in the film as a God complex. And he just doesn't seem like that nice of a guy. But he and Bill Pullman's character, they went to school together. They've known each other since they were, late teens-ish, maybe even earlier. And they consider each other, they were not necessarily best of friends, but friendly acquaintances. So when Alec's character drops into the story, you think immediately, okay, maybe he's the killer. Or maybe this is a twist, and it turns out that Bill Pullman's character of Andy, maybe he's the killer. So the story starts to unfold in a conventional, there are clues, and there seems to be some real sinister shit going on in the basement at the school, and, a little Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street. But then the serial killer angle is solved. That might even be the end of the first act or early second act. And then we say to ourselves, well, what are we doing here? We thought we were getting a serial killer story. Well, if you just drop into Psycho, if you take a 20-year-old who has never seen Psycho, has never seen any of the IP associated with Psycho, Bates Motel, any of the other stuff associated with Psycho, Gus Van Zant's, kind of reboot in 1998, the film seems to be about a woman who steals money, feels bad about it, and then she's gonna go back, return the money, and then something happens to her, and then it's not really a movie about her at all. It's a movie about somebody called and named Norman Bates. So when the serial killer angle is kind of quelled, what are we doing now? And then the film turns into a very unconventional thriller where there's mystery elements. There is a medical malpractice angle that is handled in a way that you for sure won't be able to predict. And you have Alec Baldwin in what is a supporting role, but he is such an alpha on screen. We say what we will about Alec Baldwin with the terrible shooting on the set of Rust, which I'm not holding him even 1% responsible for. And many people in the industry said the same thing. Hey, it's not on the actor. If you want to get mad at him from the producer angle, that's something else. But it wouldn't be for this. This is why you have armorers and all of this kind of stuff. But Alec Baldwin, controversial, polarizing figure, with Saturday Night Live, whatever. He is a brilliant film actor. He was great on the stage too, from what I understand, but he's a really dominant force on screen. The previous year, Glenn Ross, he basically steals the movie in 7 minutes with with his famous rant to put that coffee down, going after Jack Lemmon's. Your name's Levine. You call yourself a salesman, you son of a bitch? See this watch? This watch costs more than your car. I'm here on a mission of mercy. So Alec plays this brilliant cardiothoracic surgeon, a similar kind of doctor to, same year, Dr. Richard Kimball. Harrison Ford in The Fugitive is the same kind of doctor, a brilliant doctor. Well, in that film, he's accused of murder. In this film, Alec's character is accused of not being his best self during a critical surgery. And maybe he should not have been doing the surgery because he either had too much to drink or he was sick or some other nonsense that's made up in the story. So Alec gets to give this God complex speech. And if you see this speech, this is another kind of thing where you could watch a clip on TikTok. In the movie Sinners, there was a clip roundly distributed, well distributed. In that instance, where Michael B. Jordan is having what appears to be a really nasty argument with the Haley Steinfeld character. And that sets up their antagonists. He hooked up with her and didn't want anybody to know about it, and now she's going to blab, and that's what it looks like, but that is deliberate misdirection. That is not what that scene at all is about, at all. Well, in the world of the movie Malice, you have this medical malpractice angle, which seems to come out of nowhere after what we think this film is about gets settled. And Alec Baldwin, in a kind of a quorum, a bit of a hearing, I don't know if it was I think it was a mediation, but it could be a mediation to see if we can settle this potential lawsuit and all of this kind of stuff. So he is accused of, he wasn't ready to do the surgery that he did. He wasn't well. And he basically fights back against it. But he fights back against it in a very strange way. Like, if you want people to think that you're hyper competent, you don't say things like, you ask me if I have a God complex? Let me tell you something. I am God. It's such a great monologue and such a great speech. And there's even a moment, an actor who ironically would later work with Bill Pullman in While You Were Sleeping, Peter Gallagher, he plays Bill Pullman's brother, or Bill Pullman plays his brother, would be more accurate. The movie While You Were Sleeping, where Sandra Bullock's character, she's kind of a sad sack, and Sandra Bullock in 1995 had 2 movies where she played women who apparently are so unattractive that no guy will go near them. In the net, she can't, she don't need no man. She can't get a guy in the net. There is no guy. She's stuck on the internet doing work because no guy would touch her with a 10-foot pole, I guess. And then here in While You Were Sleeping with Peter Gallagher and Bill Pullman, she can't get a guy, so she fantasizes that she's having a romance with Peter Gallagher's character. And then he goes into a coma, and now she falls in love with Bill Pullman. But that was a romantic comedy. Here in Malice, you have Peter Gallagher in this hearing. And it's not a big role for Peter Gallagher, but he's fucking great. He's hilarious in very limited time. He just has this smirk that never leaves his face. So as Alec is delivering this monologue, he starts talking about God and the Bible. And he says to Peter Gallagher, now these guys hate each other. They barely know one another's names. But Peter Gallagher, who's an attorney, his first name is Dennis. And in the midst of this monologue, Alec Baldwin looks at Peter Gallagher and goes, you go ahead and read your Bible, Dennis. He could have gotten an Oscar nomination just for how he says the word Dennis. It's just it's oozing with contempt. You go ahead and read your Bible, Dennis. And with any luck, you could win the annual raffle. But if you're asking about God, he was in operating room 2 on the night in question, and he doesn't like to be second guessed. So the story goes in all kinds of directions that we don't see coming, and I'm not going to spoil any more, but suffice to say, between Bill and Alec and Nicole, we have a maze of murders and double crosses and a shit ton of money that really shouldn't even be in play, but is possibly in play only because of the God complex monologue. And when this movie came out, as I mentioned, the polarization, you could see it now, but even back then, you had major critics just not liking this film. And I'm pretty sure, I know Roger Ebert didn't like it, and I usually agreed with him. I don't think that either Ebert or Siskel gave it a thumbs up. Their problem, their hang up, and you could check out their review on YouTube. It's very easy that all of their reviews for decades are on YouTube. Excuse me. Their biggest issue was that the film sets up a serial killer story and drops it. No, it doesn't drop it. That was deliberate misdirection. They had the wrong take, and there were other critics who also had the wrong take on this film. They thought they were getting one movie, as I did, but when the movie pivoted, I pivoted along with the film. And I should also mention, there are 2 other major stars of earlier eras who play key supporting roles in this film. One being George C. Scott. Well, it was always great when he popped up in movies in the 90s. You know, Exorcist 3, not as good as the first one, but a really good second sequel to, William Friedkin's original. And George C. Scott more or less is the lead in that film. And he's in the movie Angus, which is kind of a goofy, kind of teen hijinks movie. You know, a sort of an awkward teen has a crush on a girl. I mean, I kind of identified with this loser, no offense to him or me. But George C. Scott plays I think a Harvard, or was it MIT, but he was Alec Baldwin's kind of mentor, and he sits in on this meeting, and the looks that he's giving Alec Baldwin in that scene are just gold. I mean, George C. Scott is fucking awesome in this film. So you have George C. Scott in a key supporting role, and you have Anne Bancroft also in a key supporting role. And, she was still working a lot in that era, not doing necessarily big roles. She plays Nicolas Cage's mom the previous year in Honeymoon in Vegas, where she basically tells him on her deathbed, don't get married, don't get married. And then, of course, he goes ahead and proposes to Sarah Jessica Parker. And then here comes James Caan and the poker match, and all hell breaks loose. And before you know it, you have 100 Elvis impersonators, and Nicolas Cage as an Elvis impersonator jumping out of an airplane in Vegas, hence the title Honeymoon in Vegas. And then there was a certain irony that Nicolas Cage got together with Lisa Marie Presley after that. But Anne Bancroft plays a pivotal, shocking supporting role, and Bill Pullman's character figures something out in the final third of the film and goes to visit her, and she gives him just enough information for him to continue to push forth. And this was an interesting performance because for most of the movie, Bill Pullman's character is alternately bewildered, scared, confused, some combination of those 3, but he is constantly being put down, ridiculed, belittled, taken advantage of, and being played for a schmuck, quite frankly. And then he just seems to find his footing, and his line readings sharpen as his character begins to have an attitude of, fuck this, I'm not backing up anymore, I'm going to get to the bottom of what's going on, and if it means I maybe have to get somebody slightly killed, fuck them, let's go. And to see him rise after spending most of the movie as a little bit of a punching bag, a little bit of a milquetoast. There's a great word that's not in common usage. Milquetoast with a Q. It's great to see that he kind of gathers whatever reserves are within this character, but it's the actor, he pulls it off. From the actor perspective, we feel his disgust at various points, his confusion, but finally his resolve. And the story continues to surprise us. It keeps taking turns. Like, what's the deal with Nicole Kidman's character? And was there any kind of deliberate misdirection with Alec's character? Were we supposed to think he's one thing when he's something else? And the movie, to me, builds to a really satisfying conclusion with a kid the kid is quite clearly autistic, and Nicole's character and Bill, and, is Ed Bancroft going to be involved in the ending, and Alec, and all of this kind of stuff going on. But Harold Becker, a really solid filmmaker. He did Sea of Love. Speaking of great thrillers, although that was 80s, that's the film with Big Al and Ellen Barkin and John Goodman. A great thriller. I mean, that's about as good as it gets as far as a suspense thriller with a lot of jump scares. It's not a horror film, but a suspense thriller with a lot of jump scares, but also a fascinating whodunit. Who is the killer? Is it the Ellen Barkin character or is it not? And the movie kind of dances back and forth. Michael Rooker, another great actor, also in that movie. And Harold Becker, as filmmaker, is able to frame a lot of this film as if it is a film noir. It wasn't advertised as such, but there is a lot of light and shadow. There is a lot of darkness and light. And there are a lot of morally conflicted characters. And at the end of this movie, you could look at Bill Pullman's protagonist as a morally conflicted character, but I believe that he started off as exactly what he seemed to be, which is a kind of humble good guy, maybe punching up above his weight class a little bit with Nicole Kidman, but maybe not. And his changes are logical within the confines of this story. And a movie I not that long ago mentioned, A Simple Plan, the film with Billy Bob Thornton, Bill Paxton, Bridget Fonda, among others. That's a movie where Bill Paxton starts the film as the kind of Bill Paxton character we know and love, and then he becomes almost man, you wouldn't want to go anywhere near this guy, but it's the events of the story that push him in that direction. Now, I don't see Bill's character of Andy, he's not making that kind of a turn, but his movements throughout the story, particularly in the final act, they are believable. He is not an active character until you're getting almost to the end. He is mostly reacting. And, you think in terms of what great movies have that kind of a template. Well, Cary Grant in North by Northwest. This, again, is not anywhere near, it's the second Hitchcock film I mentioned, but from a conceptual standpoint, the idea of a reactive protagonist, and maybe that's why Alec Baldwin and Nicole Kidman are on the poster, because they're driving the action of the film. They're driving the bus, and the nominal protagonist is playing catch-up. He is reacting to them as opposed to taking action on his own until the movie gets towards the end and he realizes what the fuck has happened and what will happen unless he maybe makes a principled stand, or not even a principled stand. Go fuck yourself. The Tom Cruise from Tropic Thunder, it applies to so many situations where characters have just had enough and, they're mad as hell. In the immortal words of Peter Finch in Network, they're mad as hell and they're just not going to take it anymore. So before I forget, Malice is streaming free on Tubi. That's a free app where you do have to deal with commercials, but not many. It's not like Pluto, where for every 10 minutes of movie, you seem to have 10 minutes of commercials. But Malice is a film that I have seen multiple times, and if my dad, may he rest in peace, was asked to name his 5 favorite thrillers, Malice would have been on the list. This was one of his go-to movies. He loved the twists and turns, the performances, the kind of set and costume design, the way that Alec He loved the God complex speech. And, Alec Baldwin had two iconic moments. That's not as famous, obviously, as Put That Coffee Down from Glengarry Glen Ross. But when you have an actor who is as sort of literate and, the speech patterns and the rhythms and the rat-tat-tat, because he did Mamet again, of course, in The Edge with Anthony Hopkins. But there are so many quotable lines from Malice and so many great moments with Alec Baldwin's character. And then to see the nominal protagonist, who is kind of, a little puppy dog getting beat around, to see him rise towards the end is really great. And his character is somebody that you want to root for. You don't feel bad rooting for him. You want him to get some measure of justice, redemption, maybe even a little bit of revenge, because he certainly has taken a lot of crap from a lot of different people, and he's been put in really terrible situations, not through his own doing. So other Bill Pullman films, I'm not a big fan of Lake Placid. And of course, I should have just wrapped up that. But yeah, that's all I have to say about the movie Malice. I don't want to spoil anymore because this is a very spoiler-heavy film. There are so many different... I gave away enough when I said it feels like a serial killer story and isn't. But I've always been a fan of Bill Pullman, going back to Ruthless People, which I first saw about 1990. But Spaceballs was the first movie with him that I saw, the Mel Brooks, fantastic, and he's in the sequel. I hope that it's a corker. It probably will be. One of my favorite horror films, Wes Craven's The Serpent and the Rainbow. That's Bill's first, kind of conventional leading man role. And he's terrific in Support and Sleepless in Seattle, playing the fiance of Meg Ryan. He's a little bit of a schlemiel in that film. He's terrific in a small role in Singles as Bridget Fonda's potential suitor and potential plastic surgeon. Just so many terrific performances. And as I mentioned while you were sleeping, but then the next year, he did the film Mr. Wrong with Ellen DeGeneres as a leading lady. That was really something. And that's a black comedy a lot of people really like, despite, again, the weird casting of putting the two of them together, more or less. But he's a riot in that movie. He's just one of those actors. He worked with Wim Wenders in a movie called The End of Violence, and he did Lost Highway with David Lynch. He's just a really solid actor, and I feel that Malice, if anything, it took as much advantage of his screen persona, the good-looking guy, but maybe there's nothing behind the good looks, like that kind of thing. I feel that Harold Becker knew how to optimize what Bill Pullman could do on screen, and he did it, and it's a terrific performance. Look, to just hold your own with Alec Baldwin is difficult, and with Nicole Kidman. Nicole Kidman is a tremendous film actress. Even if she's made some kind of clunkers in the last 10, 15 years, she's fantastic. She's great. So a happy 72nd birthday to Bill Pullman. And if you haven't seen Malice, it's well worth your time. It is a terrific suspense thriller with elements of a lot of other different kinds of films. But when it comes time to deliver the goods with the jump scares and the plot twists and the double crosses, it's a really, really strong film. This has been episode 658 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your, hopefully, happy hump day here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.